Please give a rousing, bold welcome to Dr. Thomas E. Woods, Jr.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you very much. Well, there's a very small sliver of the human population that hears the words, there's an economics lecture going on this Friday night, and then shows up for it. So, God love you people. Thank you so much. Secondly, I have a word of consolation for those of you who do not win the raffle. You can still get copies of the book using those green pieces of paper in your wallet. My wife, who's so wonderful, will be assisting me in this, so thank you very much. And I'm not going to guilt you into buying my books. I want you to buy them only on their merits. I'm not going to mention we have 3 small children, their tricycles falling apart. Totally irrelevant. Just merit alone. Well, let's see. I don't have a clock, so I'm going to put... Is there a clock in the room? Oh, yeah, but if I keep looking over there, you'll think, man, has he got another appointment? He doesn't like us? So let's see if we can balance this down here. And when I look down here, you'll think I'm looking at my notes. I'm actually looking... in fact, most of what I have here is just a couple of quotations that I want to share with you a little bit later. So what I want to do tonight is try to give you a different perspective on the economic crisis from what you're likely to have heard. Now, again, this is a self-selected group. Many of you will have heard the rough outlines of what I'm going to tell you. But I was actually pleased to see that there are some people in this room who identify themselves as being on the left. How wonderful. That people are open-minded enough to say, you know what, I'm probably going to detest this guy, but I'm going to go listen to him anyway. I hope you won't detest me. You'll actually find me a really warm, nice guy. Really, honest to goodness. I'm not bad. I'm nice, okay? But I hope that when you leave here, you will say, okay, maybe I don't buy this guy's whole package, but he raised some ideas I've never thought of. He's raising questions nobody's answering. Nobody's even asking, but they seem to deserve answers. And I'll be satisfied. I'll be satisfied if you think that. And, if you buy a book on the way out in particular. Because the new one, the one I'm promoting these days, is called Meltdown. It's about the economic crisis, and we saw it on the screen a little while ago. I wrote, and in fact, we're seeing it right now. Good old Israel Anderson, he knows what he's doing, I'm telling you. Well, I wrote this book in great haste in order to bring it out early this year. It came out February 9th. And I wrote it, and talks about events going through December 2008. So I had a publisher that was very cooperative, that wanted to help me get this out before the public, because I thought, I know what's going to happen. There's going to be an avalanche. I should be careful saying that in Colorado. I don't know if it's a sensitive topic. Let's just say a whole barrage of books coming out on the economy that are all going to say the same thing. They're all going to say the free market doesn't work. You're all a bunch of stupid rubes for believing in it. We tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen, whatever. And so what we need is your overlords need just a little more power, and they'll set everything right. We've all heard this before. We're going to hear it 1,000,000 times. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if the genuine, pure, free market point of view gets out there before the public before the anti-market point of view even has a chance to get organized? So thankfully I had a publisher, Regnery Publishing, that believed in this project, that got it out there. They are so fast and efficient. I've worked with them several times. I mean, you send in your manuscript, and, then later that afternoon, just for fun, you're going through the bookstore, and somehow your book is already on the shelf. How can this be? So thanks very much to them. So I'm going to start off by talking about a couple of the factors that led to the crisis that we're enduring right now, that people who, let's say, are on a lot of right-wing talk radio tend to focus on. And I've done an awful lot of these radio programs, and there are a lot of decent people who host and listen to them. They're not all decent, but there are some who are decent. And they tend to focus on a couple of factors. And I want to suggest to you that although these factors are not entirely irrelevant, they are really missing the ball here. They're not keeping their eye on the ball by focusing on them. And I want to focus our attention tonight on rather a different culprit. But let me start with some of the typical ones. First are Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We hear a lot about them. Now, Fannie and Freddie, to make a long story short, and I talk about them in the book, but to make a long story short for our purposes, we'll just say Fannie started in the latter half of the 1930s as expressly a government agency. And then several decades later, it was ostensibly privatized. Freddie Mac, conversely, began in 1970 as a putatively private organization. And these organizations are involved in the secondary mortgage market, or they have been for a number of years, so that when your bank, in effect, extends to you a mortgage loan, the bank will often not keep that loan on its books, as you know. They can sell that, including the right to all the future monthly mortgage payments, to institutions like Fannie and Freddie. Well, if Fannie and Freddie really were purely private organizations, they were very odd examples of private organizations. Number one, they enjoyed tax and regulatory breaks that other mortgage guarantors did not enjoy. There are a variety of special privileges government granted that they enjoyed, in addition to the line of credit that they got from the U.S. Treasury that was always available. But beyond that, everybody knew, everybody who wasn't a total blockhead knew that if it should come to that, Fannie and Freddie would be bailed out by the taxpayers. Everybody knew that. And in fact, it turns out everybody was right. That's in fact what happened. So obviously there is an artificial stimulus to risk in that scenario. You can keep all the big profits, but don't worry, if it goes too sour, the suckers will all eat the losses. And so people have argued that these special government privileges that these strange, weird, hybrid, public-private organizations enjoyed allowed them to attract more capital into the housing market than would otherwise have been possible on a genuine free market. Secondly, people talk about something called the Community Reinvestment Act, which is a Carter-era piece of legislation, but that really only got enforcement teeth from a regulatory point of view in the mid-1990s or so under Bill Clinton. The purpose of this legislation was to target what was alleged to be discrimination in mortgage lending, in lending by banks. And so the argument was that in order to exonerate yourself, in effect, to protect yourself against possible lawsuits alleging discrimination, you as a financial institution basically should be extending loans not just in the outlying areas of a city, just on the periphery, but really in the community itself. And if you are not extending loans according to some percentage that a government agency will determine, then in effect the presumption is that you're guilty of discrimination. And it becomes difficult in court to prove that you're not guilty of discrimination, because what are you going to do, put a Svengali on the stand? How are you going to prove that you didn't intend to discriminate, that it just happened to turn out this way? Well, in fact, it's impossible to do that. And so what in fact happened was the banks began to engage in effect, affirmative action in lending. And that's not a controversial statement, because people who supported the Community Reinvestment Act called it that. They expressly said, this is affirmative action in lending. In fact, when AccuBank was taken to court for discrimination and was found guilty, it was saddled with a punishment of $2.1 billion that had to be allocated to inner-city mortgage loans. And the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development at that time, Andrew Cuomo, actually said that, yeah, I'm sure that the mortgage loans they extend under this penalty will be riskier, there will be higher default rates than will other mortgages in the bank's portfolio. So again, it's not like this is some crazy theory that Rush Limbaugh thought. People at the time said this. They said, yeah, sure this will happen. Absolutely this will happen. But, that's the punishment. What I want to suggest to you, though, is that if these factors aren't altogether red herrings, they are nevertheless grossly overstated in their importance. I want to suggest there's another institution that deserves our attention, and that's an institution that most of us are taught really to ignore. That don't worry, your betters are in charge, you don't even need to be knowledgeable about this. In fact, it's probably better that you not really know anything about it, and that's the Federal Reserve System. Now, most people